The blizzard howled through Cedar Falls like the screams of the damned, and Jasper Reed stood face to face with the devil himself. Lucius Crane's expensive coat was torn and bloodied. His hired gun, Black Jack Morrison, lay dying in the snow. And Ellen, the woman who'd turned his simple world upside down, was somewhere in that storm, fighting for her life. "You killed my Margaret," Jasper growled, his Colt 45 steady despite the wind that cut through him like frozen knives. "Poisoned her slow while she carried my child." Lucius smiled through split lips, even with defeat staring him down. "And I'll kill your precious Ellen too, cowboy, even if you put a bullet in me tonight." 4 months ago, Jasper had written a simple letter, asking for a plain wife. Instead, he'd gotten a woman so beautiful, she'd ignited desires he thought he'd buried forever. A woman carrying secrets that could destroy the most powerful man in the territory. Now the snow was turning red, and everything hung on what he'd do next. Stay with us to discover how a rancher's simple wish for companionship became the most dangerous game of love and vengeance Wyoming had ever witnessed. Wyoming Territory, summer of 1878. The drought had lasted 18 months, turning the grasslands to dust and killing cattle by the hundreds. Jasper Reed sat in his cabin 12 miles from Cedar Falls, staring at blank paper by lamplight. At 38, he was tired of talking to his horse and eating beans from a can. Margaret had been dead 4 years, died in childbirth, along with their son, and the loneliness was eating him alive. But he'd learned his lesson about beautiful women and the pain they brought. He dipped his pen and wrote carefully. Frontier Marriage Agency, Kansas City. Require wife. Must be hardworking, plain appearance, skilled domestic duties. Do not want beauty. Brings only trouble to a man's doorstep. Simple woman for simple life. J. Reed, Cedar Falls, Wyoming Territory. 8 weeks later, the Union Pacific wheezed to a stop at Cedar Falls Station, and Jasper's simple life died the moment Ellen Sawyer stepped off that train. She moved like poetry in motion, her golden hair catching the harsh summer sun, the modest blue dress unable to hide the graceful curve of her waist or the way she carried herself with unconscious elegance. When those emerald eyes found his, Jasper felt something he'd buried with Margaret claw its way back to violent life. "Mr. Reed." Her voice was cultured, educated, nothing like the frontier women he'd expected. He managed a nod, his throat suddenly dry as August dust. She was everything he'd specifically asked not to have. And God help him, he wanted her more than his next breath. The town of Cedar Falls, 400 souls where unmarried women were scarcer than rain, erupted in whispers the moment they saw her. Mrs. Whitman, the merchant's wife with a tongue sharper than her husband's razor, didn't waste time spreading poison. "Mark my words," she hissed to anyone who'd listen. "That woman's running from something, probably a St. Louis brothel." The first test came that very evening. The Porter brothers, drunk as usual and mean as rattlesnakes, cornered Ellen outside the general store. "Well, well," Jake Porter leered, his breath reeking of rot-gut whiskey. "Ain't you a pretty little thing? Too pretty for a broken-down rancher like Reed." Ellen stood perfectly still, but Jasper saw the way her hand moved toward the small handbag at her side. When Tommy Porter reached for her, she stepped back with fluid grace. "Gentlemen, I suggest you return to your drinks," she said coolly. They laughed. That was their mistake. The Derringer appeared in Ellen's hand like magic, its small barrel aimed directly between Jake's eyes. "I said, return to your drinks." The brothers sobered fast, backing away with raised hands. Word spread through Cedar Falls that night. The new woman wasn't just beautiful. She was dangerous. Back at Jasper's cabin, He found her washing clothes by the creek behind the house. The setting sun painted her in gold, and when she bent forward to wring out a shirt, the neckline of her dress revealed smooth skin that made his breath catch like a schoolboy's. She looked up, caught him staring, and something electric passed between them in the twilight air. "I brought coffee," he managed, his voice rougher than usual. "Thank you." She straightened, water droplets catching the dying light on her arms. "I know I'm not what you requested, Mr. Reed." Not what he'd requested? She was devastating. She was going to destroy his carefully built walls, and they both knew it. That night, Ellen's screams tore through the cabin walls like physical things. Jasper found her thrashing in the narrow bed, caught in terror's grip. "Ellen!" He caught her shoulders gently, careful of his strength. "You're safe." "It's just a dream." Her eyes snapped open, wild and beautiful and afraid. She clung to him like a drowning woman, and through the thin fabric of her nightgown, he could feel every curve, every rapid heartbeat, every tremor of fear. "Tell me," he whispered, stroking her hair. And she did. About Judge Sawyer, her father, found dead at the bottom of his courthouse stairs in St. Louis. About Lucius Crane, the railroad baron who'd been courting her before her father's convenient accident. About the papers she'd found hidden in her father's safe. Evidence of massive corruption that could topple Crane's empire. "He killed Papa to silence him," she whispered against Jasper's chest, her tears soaking through his shirt. "And he wants to marry me, to make sure those papers never see daylight. I ran, but I know he's looking for me. Men like Lucius don't give up." Jasper's arms tightened around her protectively. "He'll have to come through me first." The drought hit Wyoming like God's own punishment. Wells dried to dust, cattle collapsed under the merciless sun, and Jasper watched his life's work dying by degrees. The nearest water was 12 miles away, in Cedar Falls, too far for his animals. Ellen surprised him. While other women might have wilted, she studied the land with intelligent eyes, remembering lessons from childhood expeditions with her father. "There," she pointed toward a grove of cottonwood trees, a quarter-mile from the cabin. "Papa taught me. Trees like that don't grow without underground water." They dug for 3 days straight under the punishing Wyoming sun. Ellen's soft hands blistered and bled, but she never complained, never quit. Sweat soaked through her dress, clinging to every curve, and more than once Jasper had to force himself to focus on the work instead of watching the way she moved. When they finally struck water, pure and cold and life-giving, they collapsed beside the new well, laughing with exhaustion and relief. In that moment, covered in mud and sweat, Ellen had never looked more beautiful. "We did it," she breathed, looking at him with something that made his chest tight with want. "We did it," he agreed, and when she leaned toward him, lips parted and eyes dark with something deeper than gratitude, he almost kissed her. Almost. That night, the wolves came. Jasper woke to the sound of his sheep screaming in terror. He grabbed his Winchester and ran outside to find a pack of timber wolves tearing through his flock like demons. Ellen appeared beside him, her father's old Colt steady in her hands, moonlight gleaming on the barrel. They fought side by side, their shots dropping wolves with deadly precision. But the pack leader, a massive gray beast with yellow eyes, broke through their defenses. Ellen turned to face it, calm as Sunday morning, and put a bullet between its eyes at 20 yards. "Jesus," Jasper breathed, staring at her in amazement. "Papa taught me more than geology," she said simply, then swayed on her feet. Blood was seeping through her dress where another wolf had raked her shoulder. Inside the cabin, by lamplight, Jasper cleaned and bandaged her wounds. his fingers tracing over torn silk and smooth skin. She shivered under his touch, not from pain, but from something else entirely. "Jasper," she whispered. When he looked up, her eyes were dark with desire. The air between them grew thick, charged like the moments before lightning strikes. This time, when she leaned toward him, he didn't pull away. Her lips were soft, desperate, tasting of courage and need. She made a small sound in her throat as his hands found her waist, and 4 years of loneliness poured into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "We shouldn't," he started. "I know," she whispered, but her fingers were already working at the buttons of his shirt. "I know, we shouldn't. But I'm tired of running, Jasper. Tired of being afraid. Tonight I just want to feel alive." What happened between them that night was tender and fierce, desperate and healing all at once. Ellen gave herself to him completely, her soft cries mixing with whispered endearments as years of loneliness and pain melted away in the heat of their joining. Afterward, as she lay curled against his chest, like a contented cat, she told him everything. How Lucius had cornered her in her father's study the night before the judge's death. His hands, rough and possessive, as he tried to force himself on her. "I fought him off," she said quietly. "Told him I'd expose his crimes if he ever touched me again." The next morning, Papa was dead, and I knew. I just knew who was responsible. "What kind of evidence do you have?" Jasper asked, his arms tightening around her. "Railroad contracts showing inflated prices, land deals worth millions that never existed, records of bribes to federal judges, enough to hang him and half his organization." She looked up at him with those devastating green eyes. "But if he finds me—" "He won't," Jasper said fiercely. "I won't let him hurt you." But even as he made the promise, they both knew Lucius Crane wasn't the kind of man to give up easily. Lucius arrived in Cedar Falls like a plague made flesh. His private railroad car gleamed black as a hearse, and when he stepped onto the platform, he brought with him 4 hired killers and enough money to buy whatever justice he couldn't steal. By sunset, he'd purchased the loyalty of half the town council and made it clear that anyone harboring Ellen Sawyer would face deadly consequences. Sheriff Clayton, an honest man caught in an impossible situation, rode out to warn Jasper. "He's got papers," Clayton said grimly. "Claims her father owed him $10,000 and she's collateral on the debt. It ain't legal, but he's got lawyers and judges backing his play." The next morning, Lucius rode to Jasper's cabin with his hired guns and cold arrogance. "She belongs to me, Reed," he announced, not bothering to dismount from his fine horse. "Her father owed me money. The girl is payment." Jasper stepped onto his porch, Ellen behind him, both of them armed and ready. "Maybe her father owed you something. But Ellen doesn't belong to anyone. She's my wife now." It wasn't exactly true. They hadn't had time for proper ceremony. But he said it with conviction. Lucius smiled, cold as winter death. "Is she? According to what law? What paperwork?" Then he dropped the bomb that shattered Jasper's world. "Did you know your precious Margaret didn't die in childbirth complications, Reed?" "Oh, she went into labor naturally enough. But the fever that killed her, that was helped along by a little arsenic in her medicine. Dr. Patterson was quite cooperative when I explained the situation." The blood drained from Jasper's face. "What situation?" "Your wife had seen certain documents during her father-in-law's funeral. Railroad contracts, payment schedules, bribes that might have raised uncomfortable questions with the territorial governor. I couldn't allow that kind of curiosity." Lucius shrugged as if discussing the weather. She was going to be a problem. So I solved her. 4 years. 4 years of guilt, of blaming himself for not having money for better doctors. 4 years of believing he'd failed her. You murdered my wife, Jasper said, his voice deadly quiet. And my son. I eliminated a threat to my business interests, just like I'm about to eliminate this one. Lucius gestured to his men. Ellen comes with me now, willingly, or this town burns tonight. Your choice, cowboy. Lucius smirked coldly, his eyes glinting with cunning. He raised a hand, signaling his 4 hired guns to turn their horses, the steady clatter of hooves echoing on the dusty trail. Think carefully, Reed, he said, his voice laced with menace. I'll be back soon enough. As Lucius's silhouette faded beyond the hill, Jasper gripped his rifle tightly, his gaze sweeping to Ellen, who stood steadfast behind him, her Colt steady in her hand. He won't stop, Ellen whispered, her voice trembling slightly, but resolute. Jasper nodded, his mind a storm of thoughts. He needed help, from Sheriff Clayton or anyone in Cedar Falls who still held a shred of integrity. Stay here. Lock the door, he told Ellen, his voice low but firm. I'm going to town to find a way to stop him before things get worse. Ellen nodded, her green eyes flashing with trust, but both felt the chill of the approaching storm. In Cedar Falls, Jasper's pleas fell on deaf ears. The town council, their pockets lined with Lucius's gold, turned their backs, muttering about debts and untouchable power. Even Sheriff Clayton, his face grim, could only offer a shake of the head. He's got the territorial judge in his pocket, Jasper, Clayton said. You're on your own. As the first snowflakes of the unseasonable blizzard began to fall, a cold dread gripped Jasper's heart. Ellen was alone at the ranch, and Lucius's parting words echoed in his mind. I'll be back soon enough. Jasper spurred his horse back to the ranch at a gallop, a gnawing dread heavy in his chest like a stone. When he pushed open the door, he froze at the sight. Tables and chairs overturned, a bullet hole splintered through the wooden frame near the hearth, and Ellen's handkerchief lay crumpled on the floor, stained with a trace of dried blood. A shattered clay jug lay scattered at the foot of the table, and the faint smell of gunpowder lingered in the air. Ellen had fought. He knew it with certainty, but they were too many. In the center of the room, pinned to the table with a dagger, was a note in Lucius's elegant script. Abandoned silver mine, 5 miles north. Come alone at midnight with any papers she gave you, or she dies slowly. L. Crane. Jasper crushed the paper in his fist, rage flaring like a wildfire in his chest. He closed his eyes, the image of Ellen with her Colt in hand vivid in his mind. She was still alive, and he would find her, even if it meant facing hell itself. As if summoned by the evil gathering around Cedar Falls, an unseasonable blizzard began to fall. One of those freak Wyoming storms that could drop 2 feet of snow in summer. Jasper saddled his horse and rode into the teeth of it, carrying his Winchester and the cold certainty that tonight justice would be served. The abandoned Silver Point mine sat like a wound in the earth, its timber supports black against the swirling snow. Jasper found Ellen tied to a support beam in the main shaft, blood trickling from a split lip, but her eyes still defiant. Lucius stood beside her, with 3 of his men, including the notorious gunfighter Black Jack Morrison, a killer with 12 notches on his gun and ice water in his veins. Punctual, Lucius observed. I do appreciate that in a man about to die. Let her go, Jasper said, his rifle trained on Crane's chest. Your fight's with me. My fight is with anyone who threatens my empire. Lucius pressed his pistol against Ellen's temple. Drop the rifle, Reed. Do it now, or I paint these walls with her brains." The Winchester clattered to the frozen ground. That's when Ellen proved why she was Judge Sawyer's daughter. The ropes binding her weren't meant for someone who'd spent her childhood learning woodcraft and survival skills. She'd been working them loose for hours, and when Lucius's attention focused on Jasper, she broke free. "Now!" she shouted, diving away from Crane. The mine exploded into chaos. Morrison went for his gun, fast as a striking snake, but Jasper was faster. His shot took the killer in the chest, sending him sprawling. One of Crane's other men fired wild in the darkness, and Jasper's return shot dropped him too. In the confusion, Lucius grabbed Ellen again, using her as a shield as he backed toward the mine entrance. "It's over, Crane!" Jasper called out, advancing through the swirling snow. "Your men are dead, and the federal marshals are waiting in Cedar Falls with all the evidence." Ellen's father gathered. "You think it ends here?" Lucius snarled, his cultivated facade finally cracking. "I own judges, senators, half the territorial government. Even if you kill me tonight, there are others. My organization will hunt you both to the ends of the earth." Jasper raised his rifle, and for a moment, the temptation to pull that trigger was overwhelming. One shot would end the man who'd murdered Margaret, who'd tormented Ellen, who'd bought and sold human lives like cattle. But Ellen's voice cut through his rage. "Don't become him, Jasper. Don't let him turn you into a killer." Instead of firing, Jasper pistol-whipped Lucius unconscious. It was over. The trial in Denver lasted 3 weeks and made headlines from San Francisco to New York. Ellen's testimony, backed by Judge Sawyer's hidden evidence, revealed a web of corruption that stretched across the entire Western railroad system. When the guilty verdicts came down, Lucius Crane and 7 of his associates were sentenced to hang. His financial empire collapsed overnight, and the stolen lands were returned to their rightful owners. Jasper wasn't in the courtroom to hear it. He was standing in Cedar Falls Cemetery, holding Ellen's hand as they looked down at Margaret's grave. "I'm sorry it took me so long to learn the truth," he said quietly. "I should have known you'd never leave willingly." Ellen squeezed his fingers. "She knows now," she said softly. "And I believe she'd want you to find happiness again." They were married the following Sunday, in a ceremony that packed the little church to overflowing. Even Mrs. Whitman came, bringing a wedding cake and an apology for her earlier gossip. Sheriff Clayton performed the ceremony, since the preacher had taken ill, and when Jasper kissed his bride, the whole congregation erupted in cheers. As autumn painted the Wyoming hills in gold and crimson, Ellen and Jasper rebuilt more than just his ranch. They built a future together, one day at a time. The new well kept flowing even after the drought ended, and by winter, his herd was the strongest in the territory. Ellen proved as capable with ranch finances as she was with a rifle, and word spread that the Reed place was hiring good men at fair wages. Slowly, Cedar Falls grew from a struggling frontier outpost into a proper town. On a clear November evening, as the first stars appeared over the distant Rockies, Jasper and Ellen sat on their porch swing, watching their cattle graze in pastures made green by underground springs and autumn rain. Ellen's hand rested on her gently rounded belly, where new life was growing. A son or daughter who would never know the fear and violence that had brought their parents together. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd been the plain, simple woman you asked for?" Ellen mused, studying her husband's weathered profile. Jasper was quiet for a long moment, listening to the evening sounds of their ranch, cattle lowing, horses nickering softly, the distant call of coyotes singing to their mates under the endless Wyoming sky. "I thought I wanted simple," he said finally. "Safe." a life where nothing could hurt me again. He turned to look at her, his eyes warm with love and firelight from the windows behind them. But that's not living, Ellen. That's just surviving. And you taught me the difference. She leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of sage and leather and home. And now? Now we build something worth fighting for. Something worth protecting. His hand covered hers on her belly. Something that will last long after we're gone. Above them, the Wyoming stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to love born in violence, tempered by loss, and made stronger than the mountains themselves. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the plains, carrying other dreamers toward their own uncertain destinies. But here, on this porch, in this moment, there was only peace. If this tale of love moved your heart, let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. Like and subscribe for more stories from America's wild frontier, where justice rode with a 6-gun and love was worth dying for. Until next time, may your aim be true and your heart even truer.